Hi, everybody. Ooh, that's nice and loud. My name is Belen, and I'd like to welcome you all to Bluestockings Bookstore. This is a volunteer-run, collectively owned independent bookstore slash activist space slash fair trade cafe and anything else you need it to be tonight. So welcome. I'm very excited to have Cathy here with us today. I'm going to pass around our silver bucket. We ask that folks like you that come to support and attend our events support with a little physical contribution. So I'll pass it around. All right. So we're very honored and excited to have Cathy Wilkerson here with us today, who was active in the civil rights movement, Students for a Democratic Society, and the Weatherwoman. In 1970, she was one of the 2 women who survived an explosion in the basement of her family's townhouse that killed 3 weathermen, forcing the group underground. For the past 20 years, she has worked as a math teacher, math educator in New York City schools, and I'd like you all to welcome her.
Coming out tonight. I know you're all really busy and have 2 jobs and big families and whatever. Can you hear me? I don't want to be too loud. How many people here are familiar with the bare outlines of this story? Just to give me a sense. Okay, good. Try not to do that. This book is a memoir. And it basically starts in childhood because I'm interested in the question of how we all put together our political view of the world. How do kids do it? How do adults do it? How do we confront different critical decisions that we come across? And a lot of times political people present their views as full-blown hatched from the egg. And actually, as we develop our thinking, it goes in a lot of different directions along the way. So that's really what this book is it's kind of a blow-by-blow about how I figured stuff out and what I thought. And it's also a story about the 60s, and the Townhouse event is kind of an iconic event of the 60s that raises questions that you all are still thinking about and wrestling with today. It's very loud. So the book is a chance to weigh in on that and sort of share the conversations that we went through about it. And hopefully it's helpful to people today. That's my intent anyway. So I'm going to read a quick passage here. This passage is from the part of the book where it takes place in February of 1970. And I had been sent to a collective in Seattle where I didn't know anybody, and I got the flu, and I was kind of out of it, and I thought I had sort of been sent off into outer space by the leadership of the organization, and I was kind of upset about that. And the story picks up from there. Is this not too loud? It's good. It's okay? Fine. Okay. After 5 days, still with a hacking cough, I wobbled downstairs to sit in on a meeting, trying to re-engage myself in what was going on. A few days later, as my strength began to return, I received a phone call. It was Terry, Mrs. Terry Robbins. He was out of jail and working in New York. Did I want to come? Yes, I said instantly. Meet me tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock at Nathan's in Times Square, he told me. I'll be there, I responded and hung up. In less than a minute, my life had changed radically. Early the next morning, I was on the first flight out of Seattle with space for youth fair. It was a raw February day. When I walked into Nathan's, the most famous of New York's hot dog stands, I scanned the dozen or so dark-coated New Yorkers standing around the cafeteria-style line, waiting for food. Seeing no familiar faces, I looked up to a balcony surrounding the dining area. There, leaning slightly over the railing, his dark glasses still on in the bright lights, was Terry. With his leather boots covered by jeans and his pea coat, he hadn't changed since I saw him last in Washington. The current ran full force between us. Terry was accompanied by JJ. The previous fall, just before Terry went to jail, JJ and Terry had begun to get close, and clearly the two of them had resumed their friendship upon Terry's release. As we left Nathan's, I slipped my arm through Terry's, our winter coats pressed tightly, a second conversation flowing beneath the more audible one amongst the three of us. Terry explained that a small, semi-clandestine collective had formed. The existence of the collective and membership in it were to be shared with no one. For the moment, the core of the group was crashing in an apartment somebody had lent them for 2 weeks. But when the occupants returned in about a week, Terry and the others would need a new place to stay. The group, Terry explained briefly, had done an action already, a firebomb that had been thrown at the home of Judge Murtaugh, then presiding over the trial of the Panther 21. Judge Murtaugh seemed to be following in the belligerent steps of Chicago's Judge Hoffman, who had physically gagged defendant and Panther member Bobby Seale during the Chicago 8 trial in October. In the New York Panther 21 case, Murtaugh seemed to take pleasure in summarily dismissing the normal rules of evidence to allow the police to introduce anything they wanted while repeatedly denying defense motions. He'd set up the courtroom with armed police, implying to the jury that he expected an armed attack at any moment. It was, Terry said, a way to prejudice jurors and make them frightened of the defendants, none of whom had ever engaged in armed political action. I assumed the group's firebombing had been done after consultation with and approval by those Panthers that remained out of jail, although I now wonder. The Panthers themselves never did comment on the action publicly. The firebombing had been dangerous because Judge Murtaugh's house was guarded by several New York City policemen 24 hours a day. The bottle filled with gasoline had broken against the front steps, burned, and gone out. At least the throwers had gotten away. By then, of course, I was hardly shocked by this action. I had assumed for weeks that many small groups were being set up to do this kind of action. While firebombing still glowed with a somewhat surreal aura, I was at the point where I could imagine learning and participating in one. Certainly everyone seemed to be doing it. Bombings were reported roughly at the rate of one a day. A Senate investigation subcommittee later estimated there had been 862 bombings from January 1969 to April 1970, and that was a conservative estimate. The Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division of the U.S. Treasury showed at least 5,000 bombings and attempts during the same period.